Tom and Jerry The Magic Ring is an interesting game, to say the least. Its general plot is based on the 2002 movie of the same name, which follows Tom and Jerry living with their current owner, who happens to be a wizard for some reason, and he requests Tom to look after his prized magic ring while he's out running errands. And of course, the cat and the mouse get into their usual shenanigans, which results in Jerry getting the ring stuck on his head, and now they must go on an adventure to remove it before the owner gets home. Despite the ridiculous number of these Tom and Jerry movies over the years, they've never really been known to have deep or intricate plots, not that I really expected them to, but I digress. As for the game we have here, it's basically a discount Streets of Rage clone where you play the main story as either Tom or Jerry, and basically you have to fight your way through various locations to find Droopy the dog, who for some reason gets himself involved in all of this. Maybe it's a reference to the film itself, but I haven't seen it in years, so who knows. But yeah, the main objective is to run around and fight with some occasional platforming thrown in the mix, which this series is no stranger to, but in this particular game, you will primarily be fighting waves upon waves of enemies, most of which happen to be evil clones of Tom. It's kind of weird. I'm not quite sure why it's that way, but it is. You will also be dodging traps and obstacles that will slow you down as you try to advance to one of the 8 areas in this game, which will usually have a mini-boss waiting for you at the end. And don't worry, they're all pretty easy. Well, except for the last one. Nonetheless, the gameplay itself was surprisingly decent at times. I did kinda enjoy the frantic chaos of jumping around and fighting one against everybody else, as well as using some of the items to give you an advantage, like the baseball bats, bombs, shovels, bottles, etc. The sound design and the music do a really good job of giving it that extra crunch to make it feel like you're really smacking them over the head. They definitely made the experience more bearable, and the short length of the campaign also does wonders in keeping you from getting bored. However, despite those little positives, the control scheme in this game, while being simple, is also very clunky and delayed most of the time. And when I say that, I mean sometimes you have to press the action button a whole second before you even get near the enemy, because sometimes they can interrupt your attack before it even lands. And some other times, you can get hit by something that definitely shouldn't have touched you. This is especially bad towards the latter part of the game, as there are a lot more things to avoid. I'd say this issue applies to both playable characters, as they are more or less the same mechanical-wise, and their stories are pretty much the same aside from a few little minor changes. And sadly, most of these flaws that I addressed are also carried over to another GBA Tom and Jerry game that I will be talking about soon as well. Not that I was expecting anything amazing, mind you, but in my own experience, most of these Tom and Jerry games that I've played have actually been pretty good. I don't see myself returning to this title ever again, honestly, but it wasn't completely terrible like I thought it'd be. Compared to the other 2 GBA installments that came out around this time, this one is about middle of the road. Tom and Jerry Fists of Furry was the first and only time this franchise has graced the N64, and would eventually kick off the very short-lived era of actually good Tom and Jerry games. Everything else that came out before it, I'm not even going to bother addressing. Just from the general layout of the game, it seems to have taken inspiration from Capcom's Arena Fighter, Power Stone, where you run about and throw hands with your opponent in these small box-like stages in either single or multiplayer mode. Unlike Power Stone, there are only 2 characters that fight on screen at any given time instead of 4. And each of the 7 playable characters control decently, I'd say. Most play about the same with varying levels of attack strength. They all have a basic punch and kick combo, an item grab, a charge throw, a duck, no, not that kind of duck, and of course, a jump move. And speaking of the jump move, sometimes the fights against the computer can be really freaking annoying because they just run to the corner and spam the jump over and over and over again, so you have no choice but to throw something to knock them down. Also, I'm not sure why this game allows the player to infinitely hover in the air like they're trying to imitate Kirby. It's not really a big problem, mind you, I just figured I should note that. Anyway, despite how simple the controls are, each of the stages are full of items and power-ups to use as well as hazards to avoid. My personal favorite being the invincibility or any of the throwable explosives or melee weapons. They were all pretty fun and definitely helped keep the levels from getting stale, as there are only a handful of locations that get frequently reused in each of the characters' campaigns. Thankfully, I feel like this game captures the slapstick elements of Tom and Jerry in a pretty great way. It was always hilariously satisfying to smack your opponent with a hammer or frying pan until they're flat as a disc on the floor, or just hearing them scream out in pain as they get burned with steam or fire. Once again, the sound design did a good job of bringing the Tom and Jerry world to life. All of the thwacks, grunts, impacts, and crashes made the experience that more enjoyable. In fact, did you know that all the characters in this game are voiced by the same person? I guess with all that money they saved in labor costs allowed them to crank out a pretty decent soundtrack as well. Now, having said that, this game is not without a few little flaws here and there. Like I mentioned earlier, the AI can be really annoying when they're constantly spamming the throw and jumping away into the corner. And sometimes it felt like my attacks just refused to damage the opponent at all, even though I'm mashing the buttons right next to them. This might have just been an issue with the version I was playing on, but I'm not really sure, as this is the only version of the game that I've played. Let me know in the comments if this has happened to you as well. Also, when you eventually get bored of single and versus mode, that's just too bad because there is absolutely nothing else to do in this game. It's about as straightforward as possible, which is not a bad thing. It's just, if you were expecting more, then you'll probably be disappointed. But yeah, despite those few little issues, Tom and Jerry Fists of Furry was an enjoyable time for the most part, and I believe it was a necessary baby step to what would become the vastly improved War of the Whiskers. If you wish to try out this obscure classic game sometime, it is also available for Windows PC, as I'm sure most people don't currently have an N64 console these days. So, have you ever wanted to play a Tom and Jerry game where Tom ends up dying and going to hell? Well, now you've got it, because Tom and Jerry Infernal Escape for the GBA is definitely the strangest and most interesting premise for one of these games that I've seen so far. Despite the fact that it came out in 2003, the TV episode that inspired it released about 50 years prior. And as I'm sure by now, most fans of the franchise have seen or at least heard of the episode Heavenly Puss from 1949, where Tom basically dies after getting crushed by a piano, and he has to repent from his old ways to escape going to hell, or in this case, escape from hell itself. I guess all those years of beating the crap out of each other finally got to him. Although I have noticed that the game's version of this plot is slightly different, as it incorporates a devil version of Jerry and this angel kitty love interest who helps Tom escape back to his normal life. In terms of gameplay, Infernal Escape is an action platformer that involves Tom running through purgatory, I guess, and your main objective is to avoid the devil's bulldog henchmen while collecting all of their golden bones so you can advance further to the next stage. I will say that the levels here are surprisingly packed with little mini areas that must be accessed by climbing ladders, flipping switches, blowing up walls, and taking out tough enemies that block your path. I feel it did require a wee bit of thought and memorization to get around the obstacles and branched off paths to find the exit. I never found this game to be super difficult or anything like that, but it was frustrating how it refused to tell you how certain mechanics worked. For the longest time, I didn't even know it was possible to light your club on fire so you could activate the TNT barrels. So normally I would just run around like a chicken with their head cut off until I just happened to stumble upon it. Also, I don't think I ever figured out what the blocks of cheese were supposed to be for. Maybe they were to distract the devil jerrys, but like I said, I have no idea. I honestly forgot the mechanic was even a thing. Also, I hate that the controls in general are pretty slow and clunky, just like I mentioned in the Magic Ring video. It makes the jumping feel floaty and the combat a little bit annoying because you have to act super early to make sure your attack or jump even lands. At least when you die, you can literally collect all of your lives back with this creative little ghost chase minigame. And yes, Infernal Escape does have a password system, which I'm honestly not even bothered by at this point. Whenever you restart the game and put in the password, you just come back to the level that you last stopped on. It's basically the closest thing to a save marker that most of these GBA games have, so I guess it's okay. And don't worry, it's not very long of a game at all. It has about 3 main areas with 12 levels in between, and even though I took my sweet time with it, to get the most out of it of course, it should only take you about an hour and a half to beat, really. Strangely enough, unlike the Magic Ring, there is only one boss battle at the very end where you finally confront the Devil Spike again, and it's okay I guess. The most difficulty came from dodging the debris and background obstacles that get in your way. And after it's all said and done, the game ends about the same as the TV episode with some little tweaks. So now, my overall experience with Infernal Escape was a little bit below average, not gonna lie. It's far from the worst game I've ever played, but compared to the other Tom and Jerry GBA games that I've tried out, this one is the least likely that I would ever come back to. But hey, if this title piques your interest, don't let my opinion discourage you from playing it. Just like its predecessor, Tom and Jerry War of the Whiskers is another arena fighter where the basic gist of gameplay is to beat the crap out of each other in a wide variety of stages. This version of the fighting game formula is greatly improved in many aspects, and if you actually got to play Fists of Furry, most of the mechanics will be very familiar to you. And the fact that this game was developed and published by the same studio helps too. I'd say this game does well to enhance the elements that were established before. This time we got more modes, more playable characters, more stages with interactive set pieces, and we even got costumes now too. Pretty cool. In terms of gameplay and control, it's around the same as before. You got basic punching and kicking, charge throws, grabbing special items and making use of their unique properties, and ducking down or blocking, the whole 9 yards, you know. But just like any good sequel, there are some new things here as well. Now you can taunt your opponent during the fight, and doing this will fill up your energy bar so you can rage out with my favorite new mechanic, Berserk Mode. Instead of having a power increase item, this game will allow you to supercharge yourself for a short while when your health is really low or when the yellow bar is filled all the way up. This definitely came in handy a few times when the battle was getting a little too hot to handle. Also, speaking of controls, the ability to infinitely jump in the air like the last game is gone, thank goodness. So now the computer has no choice but to actually stand and fight or just run away from you. Either is fine, I guess. Each character in this game has varying degrees of speed and strength depending on their difficulty level, and as you unlock them all, this becomes much more noticeable. I didn't quite realize it at first, but when you play as Nibbles or Tyke, my attacks were significantly weaker compared to someone like Butch or the Lion. So I guess you could say this game has a little bit more depth when it comes to the combat and made for plenty of interesting and close matches. Now, unfortunately, I will say that for the PS2 version that I'm playing, it only allows 2 characters to fight at once, just like Fists of Furry. However, if you play the GameCube or Xbox version, you can battle with up to 4 characters on screen to truly give off that Power Stone type of feel. I have no idea why it wasn't implemented in the PS2, but it should have been. Maybe it just wasn't working with the hardware they had, who even knows. Aside from that, at least the comedic flavor of this franchise is still prevalent here. It's still very satisfying to knock your opponent around and watch them trip over the many stage hazards / obstacles and have them react in the way that you'd normally expect. It always made me chuckle to see them get smushed flat at the junkyard, frozen by the fridge in the kitchen, pulled into a tornado, chased by bees, bitten by sharks, turned into a snowman, or even burned by a freaking dragon. You just can't have Tom and Jerry without slapstick shenanigans. It's like eating macaroni without the cheese. I personally think this title illustrates the animations very decently for a 2003 game. I'd even say the soundtrack is bigger and more bombastic as well, which is nice to hear. Pretty much everything about War of the Whiskers is greatly enhanced from Fist of Furry, making it a very worthy sequel in my eyes. Now, keep in mind, it is not the best fighting game I've ever played, but as far as Tom and Jerry games go, this is without a doubt my favorite of them all. It's just a real shame that this was one of the last official games in the franchise to have released in well over a decade. You would think that the most beloved duo in Warner Bros. Would have a little bit more media attention. Aside from that piece of crap movie from 2021, the last relevant thing Tom and Jerry has done was feature in Multiverses, but that's about it. I can only hope for better things in the future, but only time will tell. So, with everything all wrapped up, this will conclude my Tom and Jerry games marathon. I really hope y'all enjoyed it, and let me know if you want to see more series like this at some point. Thank you all so very, very much for tuning in to Anubis Black Games. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.